Hey, what's up guys, TechTine here, and before I begin, first of all, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and a giveaway announcement will happen soon. So one, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and stay tuned for the announcement. It will involve these phones and more. So without further ado, today we're going to be looking at the best budget Samsung phones, starting from the Galaxy A03s and ending it on the Galaxy S21 FE 5G. And the price point will start from $70 and it will go up all the way to $600. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first phone on this list is the Samsung Galaxy A03s, coming in at a price point of $70. So let's talk a little bit about it so you guys can get an idea of what $70 gets you. So first of all, it's made out of this kind of a hollow plastic material. So it is matte plastic, but I'm not gonna lie to you, it does feel like a $70 phone. So it's not premium or anything like that, but again, to be expected. So the back does have these ridges that help with the grip, and it is curved on the back, so the plastic comes in curved. That way it also helps with the grip. The sides are also made out of plastic. Now, as far as the display goes, this does have a 720p panel. Not the sharpest thing out there and not the most quality thing out there, but it's definitely a nice decent panel for the price that you're paying. So on the back you also have a triple camera setup, and this is an important category for people in general, but keep in mind that this is a $70 phone. So the camera does fine for $70. So the pictures do come out washed and they're not really that good quality. The colors are off all around, and just it's not a good camera, okay? But like I said, it is $70, so keep that in mind. Okay, so they do come out overexposed, kind of washed, dull, not a lot of color, and it just does not take any accurate pictures. However, in dynamic range situations, it does okay, but again, it's just a dull picture throughout. So do with that information as you wish. Now, as far as the performance, it's also disappointing. But again, $70. Don't expect it to outperform your favorite flagship phone. So a octa-core chip is in here. You also have only 33 gigabytes of RAM and a disappointing only 32 gigabytes of storage. So not a lot of storage. It does support SD cards, but the storage is just disappointing and the processing power is just not there. So performance will not be good. That's the bottom line. So this is basically a summary of what a $70 Samsung Galaxy device would look like and what the expectations are. Now, flipping the page to the higher end, well, not higher end, but a higher value, which is the Galaxy A13 LTE, and this phone does come in at $140 price point, so double the price of the Galaxy A03. So what do you get for $70 more? Here's what you get. So you get a much cleaner design in my opinion. So it still is made out of plastic, but it is this glossy material. Unfortunately, it is slippery and it is a fingerprint magnet, but it's kind of a cleaner design. So it's basically one slab of plastic all the way around. And on the back, you also do get a quad camera setup, which I will talk about in a little bit. And the bottom still retains the headphone jack, the fast USB-C port, as well as your speaker, and the fingerprint similarly placed like the A03, so it is on the right hand side alongside with your volume up and down, and the fingerprint sensor does double up as a power button. Now, as far as the display, it is also an upgrade. So you do get a 1080p panel. It is LCD, but it is a higher quality panel than the Galaxy A03s, coming in at full HD plus. So a 1080p panel, meaning that your content will look much better than the Galaxy A03s, and that combining that with the camera, which we will talk about, will justify the additional $70 that you will pay for this phone. So the panel is quality. The only thing, or the only downside about it, is that it doesn't get that bright in a nice sunny day condition. So keep that in mind. Now, switching to the camera, or cameras shall I say, you do have a quad camera setup with a main sensor of a 50 megapixels, as well as you also get an ultra wide sensor, a depth sensor, and a macro sensor. A full in-depth camera review for all these phones that I'm talking about here will be linked in the description below. So the summary behind this camera is that it already takes much better photos than the Galaxy A03. So you get more color, not as color as I personally like, but it's definitely much better. And the pictures do come out brighter, better color, not as dull as the Galaxy A03s, and they are sharper thanks to that 15 megapixel sensor. And you do get the addition of a ultra wide. Now, the dynamic range on here still provides a dull picture, but overall for the price, a much improved camera than the Galaxy A03s. Now, a disappointment part of this phone comes to performance. So it's similar, it performs really similar to the Galaxy A03s. So you only get 3 gigabytes of RAM, 32 gigabytes of storage, and an octa-core processor that doesn't perform like a good processor. So it does lag from time to time, but that's kind of the expectation of $140. Sacrifices have to be made, but overall a solid upgrade from the Galaxy A03s. The only downside that it has is the performance, the low storage. There are higher storage options, but for that you'd have to go for the international unlocked model and you will pay more money. So keep that in mind. Now, next up on this list, which is one of my favorite budget phones from Samsung, it's the Galaxy A13 5G. So the Galaxy A13 5G comes in at $200. And listen, all Samsung phones, whether they're budget or flagship, they come in different varieties. So I'm just talking about the US model. So starting with the design itself, we get a kind of similar design to the A13 LTE. By the way, the A13 5G did come out before the LTE model. So the A13 5G has a matte plastic finish rather than the glossy material that they used, which gives it a more of a premium feel. And I think I like the matte finish more than the glossy material just because it's not as fingerprint magnet, but it still is a very slippery phone. So the design inspiration between the A13 LTE and the A13 5G is really similar. Now they did dish one. So it provides a very smooth back, and it's basically the same like slab of plastic, matte plastic, as you would see on the A13 LTE model. And as far as the back also goes, you do get a triple camera setup instead of the quad cameras, and more on that in a little bit. And at the bottom still is the same port selection as the A13 LTE and the A03s. Headphone jack, speaker, the USB-C fast port, and the right hand side also still has the power button, which doubles as a fingerprint sensor, and the volume up and down. Okay, so let's switch this conversation and talk about the display. And this is kind of a weird one. So you would think that it would have a 1080p display, right? Well, wrong. So it does have a 720p panel. It's a TFT panel. It's definitely quality, but the resolution is just not there. Yeah, you would think it's a downgrade, but at the same time, they did provide us with a 90 hertz refresh rate. So it's up to you to decide whether the 1080p is worth more than the refresh rate, or the refresh rate or the refresh rate is worth more than the 1080p, if that makes sense. I personally would have loved to have a 1080p 90 hertz. I don't know why they couldn't include both. But that's it for the display. Now the performance is a much better. It's definitely an upgrade from the Galaxy A13 LTE, and here they are side by side. I did a little quick Geekbench. So you have an octa-core chip. You also have 4 gigabytes of RAM as well as 64 gigabytes of standard storage. And you can see from the processing power, it just destroys the A13 LTE as well as the A03s. Now, performance was smooth. It was just what you would expect from a phone from a phone of $200 price range. So definitely gets a thumbs up from me as far as performance. It was consistent. It was good. There are bugs here and there, but it wasn't that big of a deal to me. Now, the only disappointing part is that it's only a 720p display. So let's talk a little bit about the cameras. So you do have a triple camera setup with a main sensor of 50 megapixels. Unfortunately here, Samsung did not include a wide angle lens. Still don't know why, but it is what it is. So you do get a depth sensor and a macro sensor. So it does take pictures very quickly and reliably, but I do have to say that not including wide angle is kind of disappointing since your lower end A13 does have it. I don't know what Samsung was thinking. It is what it is, but picture quality in general was very good. It's better than the A13 LTE, and to me, that I feel like that's mainly due to the processing power. So indoor photography was better. The colors did look slightly better, slightly sharper, and slightly saturated as well. So definitely gets a thumbs up from me. And the bokeh effect, maybe due to the depth sensor, is much better than the A13 LTE or the A03s for that matter. Also, the dynamic range is also respectable. Overall, this phone seems to be like a solid upgrade, but at the same time, it does not. Because one, it does provide 5G technology that the A13 LTE didn't. Two, the camera is better, and the display, the processing power and performance is also better. The only thing that's a letdown really is the display was not just sharper. So that's your A13 5G. So next up on this list is the all new, well, kind of new, the Samsung Galaxy A23 5G. It was recently released, and this comes in at a price point of $329. So the price goes up. Obviously, the quality has to go up too and match it. So let's talk a little bit about this phone. So this is the Galaxy A23 5G's design. So basically it's reminiscent of the Galaxy A53 5G and the Galaxy A52 from last year. But basically I think of it as the middle child between the A53 and the A13 5G. So it has a lot of features that are upgraded from the A13 5G. Let's talk a little bit about this design. So a matte plastic finish, definitely higher quality plastic than previous phones that I talked about as far as quality. So brings up a higher quality. You also have a quad camera setup on the back. More on that on a little bit. And the right hand side does have a power/fingerprint sensor, which is a theme in these Samsung devices, as well as your volume up and down. And the bottom has a headphone jack, a USB-C port, of course, fast charging technology is supported, as well as the speaker. Now, switching it to the display, this is definitely an upgrade. So you do have a 1080p panel. Not only that, so it uses technology that's known as PLS, so provides a higher quality as far as saturation, as far as colors, and is a bright display overall, meaning that it will do a really nice job in outdoor conditions. Not only that, here comes a kicker. So you also have a 120 hertz refresh rate for a phone that costs around 300 bucks. So the display is definitely a winner here. It gets a thumbs up. It's a massive upgrade from the A13 5G's 720p panel. So you get a higher display, sharper display, a better quality display, a higher resolution, and you get 120 hertz refresh rate. So yeah, basically the display is definitely a solid thumbs up from me. Now let's flip it and talk quickly about the specs and performance. So you have a octa-core Snapdragon 695 5G chip, 4 gigabytes of RAM, 64 gigabytes of storage, and the story behind the specs is that it's a much better performer than the A13 5G, especially when you're looking at multi-core scores. So it did a good job in benchmarks, but benchmarks really don't tell the whole story. Real quick, I do want to compare it with the A13 5G. So here they are side by side. So you can see that the multi-core is definitely a solid upgrade. And when it came to the usual tasks like browsing the web, scrolling through social media, and even gaming and doing the everyday stuff, it just is a solid performer all the way around. So I haven't seen any troubles in it or any bugs per se. So definitely it gets a solid thumbs up. I do wish that it had I do wish it had a higher RAM, like 6 gigabytes of RAM, but that's just me wanting too much out of a $300 smartphone. Overall, a solid performer. Now, the camera system on here is also pretty good. So you have a main sensor of 50 megapixels. You also have an ultra wide, which the A13 5G did not provide. Remember that. And you also have a depth sensor as well as a macro sensor, meaning that overall the quality of the pictures that came out of this phone are definitely solid. And this is also where you can see they spent a lot of budgeting on this camera, so that's where your $300 go in effect and go in play. So you do have a higher quality camera, definitely takes some really solid pictures. Colors do look good, saturated, bright, vivid. The only downside that I have about it, and I mentioned that in my full review, is that it does kind of overexpose from time to time, especially in a close-up subjects.
or subjects that require a lot of sharpening. So yeah, the dynamic range also is solid. Overall, though, definitely a phone that I can easily recommend to people. So yeah, a solid budget phone from Samsung.
So next on this list is the very popular Galaxy A53 5G, and this phone has a lot going on for it, and it starts at around $469 for this model that I have here. Let's talk about it. So Samsung did not hold back when it came to this phone. The only really letdown comes down to the plastic design on the back. However, that can be forgiven with what I'm about to tell you. So a matte plastic finish on the back, however, very clean, and it is very similar to the S22. And I feel like that's where the S22 and the S22 Plus get their inspiration from. So the first thing that you should notice is that this phone does not have a headphone jack. And that's how you know you stepped up to the higher end kind of budget smartphones. So a nicely loud speaker on the bottom as well as a faster 25-watt USB-C port. On the right hand side you do have the power button and the volume up and down. So you don't get a fingerprint sensor on the power button because it is embedded within the display itself. Speaking of which, so Samsung did not hold back when it came to the screen, so hear me out. You do get a OLED panel. It's a 1080p nicely sharp panel quality for sure, and you get 120 hertz refresh rate right off the top, and you also have the fingerprint sensor, like I said, embedded within the display itself, which for a phone at $469, you already know that this display is killer, and it's also 800 nits, which means that in outdoor brightness it will be a champion, no problem at all. So the display definitely gets a thumbs up from me. Now the camera system is a quad camera setup. Also Samsung did not play when it came to this camera. So you have a main sensor of 64 megapixels. You also have the ultra wide at 12 megapixels and a 5 megapixel macro and a 5 megapixel depth sensor. And trust me, when I tell you that the pictures that come out of this phone are quality, they really are. I would say this is definitely on a leap of its own when comparing it to the A23, the A13, the A03. It definitely just steps to a whole different category. So the camera does what you would expect, take pictures really quickly, and the photo quality that comes out of it is really nice. So the pictures are saturated in a classic Samsung fashion, bright, vivid, colorful, and the bokeh effect is really stellar, really nice. And I mean, the dynamic range also matches that energy. The wide angle lens is also really good, and the dynamic range is also really well. So you can tell right from these pictures that it already separated itself from the previous phones that we talked about. Indoor photography is good. Low light is also a step up. It's really nice. Definitely overall, this seems to be a complete camera for $469. Definitely the camera and the display get a thumbs up from me. Now let's switch up and talk a little bit about the performance. So quickly, I don't want to cover too much on performance. So here's your bottom line. It performs like a champ. So you have an Exynos 1280, I believe, chip processor. It's an octa-core processor, 6 gigabytes of RAM, a as well as standard 128 gigabytes of storage. So it performs like a boss, does what you'd expect it. Really happy and proud of this performance. Now this is where you would, so this is kind of a solid all-around phone that I haven't seen a lot of issues when it came to this device, and this is what you'd get for $469. Now I understand it's a competitive market at this price point, so you might be able to get something better, but take that with a grain of salt. This is what you would get from Samsung for $469. Last but not least is the Fan Edition, or should I say the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE 5G. So this is kind of you could think of it as a mid-range flagship device from Samsung because it pulls out also the same great stuff that the A53 did, but takes it a step further. Let's talk about it. So listen, the Galaxy S21 FE 5G is basically it was Samsung's idea of a budget flagship. So the back is still made out of plastic, so it's not really the highest quality material, but the phone feels really light, really good in the hand. So on the bottom of the phone, you do have your loudspeaker, so the speaker gets an upgrade from the A53. You also have your USB-C port that supports really fast charging. It provides wireless charging as well, so this phone does support that, which the A53 does not. So that's already another upgrade there. And yeah, it also obviously supports 5G ultra capacity, so that also gets a thumbs up from me. And overall, design wise, this phone is well built, well designed. Some people might complain that it's not made out of glass or metal or doesn't have any sort of premium material, but that comes with price cuts.
So at the end of the day, there are sacrifices when it came to this design, but the upside is really everything else. So starting with the camera system here, and I can tell you right now that it leaps forward from every other phone that I talked about in this list. So it has a triple camera setup, and the main sensor is 12 megapixels. Now you may not think that that's enough or that it compares to the A53, but trust me, it does. It supports a f1.8 aperture. It has optical image stabilization. It also has an 8 megapixel telephoto lens and a 12 megapixel ultra wide lens. It also is capable of recording video up to 4K at 30 or 60 frames per second. You can also record HDR content, or if you want slow motion at 960 frames per second, but is capped at 720p. So the camera is incredible. I don't really need to spend any more time to tell you guys that. Yeah, the camera is definitely ahead of its competition in this list. The A53 is the closest to me, but come on, this is just better. That shows you the difference between a $469 smartphone and a $600 smartphone. So this is priced $600 as of recording of this video. Keep that in mind. Now, it also gets a fat thumbs up in performance as well. So it has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G 5nm chip in it, and it is octa-core. It also has the Adreno 660 GPU and 128 gigabytes of storage, 6 gigabytes of RAM. The only downside here is that it only has 4500 milliamp hour battery. And yeah, this is kind of disappointing to me, but overall very nice in terms of performance.